Good evening and welcome to tonight's program. I'm Kelly Hancock, the Public Programs Manager here at the American Civil War Museum, and I am based in Richmond, but we've also got those that branch out in Appomattox. And as usual, I'm going to start out by just telling you about things that we have coming up, and we are doing a combination now of in-person and virtual programs. And I know it's been a while since we've had a virtual program, but it is definitely my goal to keep scheduling those and try to hold one at least once a month. So what we have coming up, our next program is actually this Sunday, April 24th at 2 p.m. at the American Civil War Museum in Richmond. We're going to have with us Dr. Warren Miltier. He will be speaking on his fairly recent book, Beyond Slavery's Shadow, Free People of Color in the South. So if you're nearby and can reach the museum, come down on Sunday afternoon and join us for this book talk. Our book talks are free, although we do charge admission to the museum unless you're a member. So that's also a great reason to become a member so that you can come visit us for these book talks and other programs that we hold throughout the year. Then on May 9th at Capitol Ale House here in Richmond, this is another in-person program. We'll have with us Nathan Hall, who is a ranger with the National Park Service here, talking about the Richmond resistance. So if you want to learn about the Unionist underground during the Civil War, join us at Capitol Ale House. Great place to have a beer and enjoy a meal as you listen to a little bit of history. And then out in Appomattox, we have another in-person program. This will be on May 12th at 6 p.m. We'll have Emily Lapizardi with us speaking on Rose Greenow's My Imprisonment. Her work, she's recently edited and annotated Rose Greenow's memoir. So she'll be talking about Rose as well as just the process that she went through to do that. And then finally, for our virtual audience, we have on May 26th, we're going to have Nick Sacco back with us, who will be talking about Ulysses S. Grant, Myth, Stories, and Realities. So make note of all these programs that are coming up. And if you forget or you're curious to know what else we have going on, you can always go to our website at acwm.org to find out more. And now for tonight, I am pleased to have with us Lisa G. Samia. She is an award-winning poet and author who loves American Civil War history. And she has been selected as the National Parks Arts Foundation's Artist in Residence for Gettysburg National Park in 2020, and then the National Park Service Artist in Residence for Manassas National Battlefield Park in 2021. And both of these selections were as a result of her Civil War poetry. And that's what she's going to be focusing on tonight. Her works include The Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War, which was her book of 28 poems and 28 essays on historical representations of Civil War events through the rhyme and narrative of poetry. And then her newest work is on the Nameless and the Faceless Women of the Civil War. And she is here to talk with us about that tonight. So without further ado, I am going to turn the screen over to our guest author and let Lisa take it away.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. Everybody can see this? Yes? Okay, great.
Looks great.
Good evening. Oh, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming this evening to the Nameless and Faceless Women of the Civil War. The Nameless and the Faceless Women of the Civil War is a collection of 28 poems with 28 accompanying historical essays. This is my second book in the Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War series. The inspiration for this collection comes from my relative, Elvira Finch Moore, shown right here on the screen. She was born in upstate New York and married to John L. Moore in 1853 in Fairfax County, Virginia, 9 years before the Civil War. However, family history suggested that she was a traitor, but I couldn't find out where, to the north, to the south. We actually still do not know. Guards and pickets passes that were given to Elvira in 1863 and 1864 show her coming and going to Washington, D.C. But in what capacity? Elvira and the mystery that surrounds her is the inspiration for this collection. And here is the cover of our book, and here is Elvira. The Nameless and the Faceless Women are for those women without a name or a face, who now have a voice to express their experiences in the Civil War. As we know, not everyone who experienced the Civil War made it into the history books. By the use and the rhyme of poetry, I hope to share their experiences and stories never before seen or heard. And so here she is, Elvira. And again, I was told for family history that she was a traitor. Added to that mystery, in the back of the photo of the lithograph on the first presentation slide, the inside pocket were several guards and pickets passes given to Elvira from 1863 to 1864. Can you imagine finding all of this? An unknown family member took great pains to preserve these documents. Was it just simply to preserve the family history, or was it left for a clue for a future relative like myself to find out the truth of Elvira Finch Moore? There was also a corresponding box full of her family letters from 1853 to 1870, and many carte de visite, or visiting cards, as you know. And my gander was up. I had to know the truth. I was bound and determined to find out the story of Elvira Finch Moore. Here also included are 3 undated carte de visite that was also in the box, in the letters. From left to right, here in the Union soldier here, this is Erastus C. Weaver, who was Elvira's brother-in-law. And then in the middle, we have Miller J. Moore, who was Elvira's son. And then again, here is Elvira. You can see her here as an older person. And this was also in the box. We're going to talk about Erastus, and we're going to talk about Millard, as well as obviously Elvira. And so research led me to find Erastus C. Weaver in the 121st New York Infantry in Gettysburg. And he would find himself there on the evening of July 2nd, held in reserve to the left of Little Round Top. Erastus would survive the war, move to Washington, D.C. from New York with his wife, Margaret, and eventually become a lawyer. This, like so many families, and without knowing the whole story of Elvira and her status during the war, is an example of the division of many families of the North and South. And of course, some were less forgiving than others. And so the search for the true story begins. She was born in Otsego County in New York, near Cooperstown, in the year of 1826. Her father was Judge Lewis Finch, and she was the great-granddaughter of Captain Peter Lowe, who served with General Washington and was present with him as they crossed the Delaware. She came to Fairfax in 1852, and I don't know why she did. There's nothing in her history to indicate why she made the trip. And in 1853, she married a John Lindsay Moore of Fairfax, Virginia. John Lindsay Moore was the oldest of 13 children born from William Haley Moore and Mary Ann Blackburn of Fairfax County in 1828. The Moores and the Blackburns were some of the oldest Virginia families in Fairfax County. And there is an article written and published by the Sunday Star, written by a John Harry Shannon, AKA The Rambler, on October 26, 1919. It's about the Moore family home in Fairfax County, their extensive, large family, and the name of the home is Springfield House. I'm going to read you just a little bit about the highlighted portion here. The little square plane that stands in the parlor, or perhaps it stands in the wide hall that runs through the middle of the house, was the shiniest, merriest little instrument When the packet sloop put it ashore at Belhaven Warehouse, it was the toast of the whole neighborhood then. The neighbors came from distant parts of the country to inspect the new house and admire this grand piano. Most of the men came on horseback, but many of the ladies came in big, grinding, rumbly family coaches, which were often appropriately called chariots. Now, also, which is not shown here, it was many years ago that William Haley Moore came into possession of Springfield House through the marriage with Mary Ann Blackburn, a daughter of Edward Lewis Blackburn, whose ownership of Springfield dates back nearly to the time of the last of the Broadwaters. They were the original owners. This was a very famous house. William Haley Moore and Mary Ann Blackburn had 13 children. The oldest was John, who married Elvira Finch of New York, and their son was Millard Moore and daughter Lillian. And it says, the little square piano which stands in the parlor, once the toast of the neighborhood, the merry voice of youth is stilled. Some facts about the Moore family, a large and extensive family in Virginia. In searching to find out more about Elvira, we would naturally look to her husband. And that is because her husband, John, and that is because, women didn't have a lot of, obviously, power, impact. So a married woman, we would look to see what her husband was doing. And looking out to find the truth, we to see if any clues came from his correspondence. And if you take a look at this letter dated February 10th, 1861, you can see from Fairfax in the upper corner, he writes to his brother and his sister, quote, probably you think it's strange that the abolition of slavery in Washington would be fatal to us. It would be in this way that our servants would run away and go there to be secreted by the free Negroes and the abolitionists of that place, unquote. A suggestion here that perhaps John and Elvira were slave owners. I'm looking and I'm trying to find evidence, but there is none that John was a soldier, either in the Union or in the Confederacy. I checked all the records. Did he pay for a substitute? Was he exempt due to the possibility he owned more than 20 slaves? Did he inherit these from his father? Remember, he was the oldest of 13 children. And a bit of a contradiction emerges as per the Ordinance of Succession from Fairfax County, Virginia on May 23rd, 1861. John L. Moore, here you see here on the right, voted against secession. His brother William and youngest brother Jeremiah, who's not on this, he's on the other page, I just didn't put it up, also voted for it. Jeremiah joined the Confederacy and was killed during the Civil War. So what changed John's mind from February to May of 1861? And again, it's a loose end. I haven't found any letter or document that would explain this. Just another layer of mystery. But one wonderful thing, another thing that I did find in this box full of Moore Finch letters, I found a letter written by Elvira to her sister in New York about her wedding day. The letter was written from Peach Grove, Fairfax, October 23rd, 1853. You see here, this is the envelope. And it contained a piece of her wedding veil. Look at the address, Mrs. Erastus C. Weaver. Erastus C. Weaver was in the Union Army. And the interesting thing was what happened when I opened it up and I found a piece of her wedding veil. It was as pristine white as you're seeing here. And it moved me because the letter was a sister talking to a sister about her going to Washington, D.C. to marry Mr. Moore, third person. She talks about her wedding bonnet. And she said, with the decorative satin ribbons, very much like the one you wore when I stood with you at your wedding. It was so beautiful. And yet it was strange and curious to read these letters, some of which looked like they hadn't been disturbed in over 160 years plus. It was so humbling, mindful the engagement ring that I've worn for the last 32 years was from Elvira's granddaughter, Adala. It was willed from my husband's side of the family through a succession of wills, and it was given to him when he would become engaged, and then it was given to me. So look at how it came down through the years. In my quest and zeal to find out the history of this family and Elvira as a traitor began to diminish as I read the words of Elvira to her sister Margaret, reading her thoughts from so many years ago, the innermost feelings of sharing her wedding day with her sister, mindful for me that as a poet, it is never just words on a page. Our historians find and painstakingly document the stories of our past and our history, but they don't always explore the deeper meaning of the words that are defining the story. As a poet, that's what I do. That is how I wrote Nameless and Faceless Women, which we will discuss very shortly. And I also believe that if history is at the heart of the story, then poetry is the soul of the story. And to add a little bit more, another layer to this family, in another painting, family painting seen here, which is also part of Elvira's history, this also had a pocket in the back of the painting. What you are seeing here is the remains of a home at Bailey's Crossroads in Fairfax County, Virginia. This painting was done in 1941 by William Parker Hudson, who was married to Elvira's other granddaughter, Emmy, who was sister to Adarla. Now, this painting is relevant as it was located on the property where President Abraham Lincoln and several invited guests, including the abolitionists Samuel and Julia Ward Howe, stood to review the Union troops in November of 1861 at Bailey's Crossroads. The event so inspired Ms. Howe, she would go on to write a poem which became the battle hymn of the Republic, the anthem of the North. Remember that card de visite of Elvira's son, Millard. In 1897, he would purchase the property to use as a summer residence. And here is their wedding photo in 1893. It was unbelievable to find out I had a connection to Bailey's Crossroads. It was absolutely phenomenal. And one more photo. This was also included in the in this box. It was very hard. I tried to copy it so you could see it. You can see how large and extensive from right to left. It looks like there's a woman in the foreground here, probably in a hoop dress. And it's undated. However, it says in the back, the Bailey home as it appeared during the war between the states. So I don't know who this family is. This was obviously before the Moores purchased the home. But if you look to the right, the house here, it sort of does look like unfortunately, that dilapidated building that I did show you. It did fall into terrible disrepair. And I bring this up as there is a poem in the collection, like I said, is called Bailey's Crossroads, and it was humbling to think that a relative of mine owned the property. And I want to show you one more thing here before we move on. This is a newspaper called the Evening Star, Washington, D.C., Wednesday, December 9th, 1942, and you're saying, well, why is that important? Because this article, actually, the house burned down in 1942, and it talks about the owners, Mrs. Mildred and Adarla Moore, the granddaughters of 1622 Upshur Street Northwest. It talks about Lincoln reviewing the troops on November 20th, 1861, and it also talks on July 17th, 1897, the homestead was sold to Millard J. Moore of Washington, D.C., the father of the present owners. So this just kind of solidifies this ownership that I was talking about. So no matter what a role, I'm humbled to get to dedicate this book to Elvira, because at every level, it begs the question, what would we have done? And if you look closely at this photo, look at her face, look at her lips. She reveals nothing. And we are still left to wonder. We have bits and pieces here and there, but nothing conclusive. And so when thinking of the family branding her as a traitor and why she was branded in that manner made me think of all the women now of the Civil War, perhaps finding themselves in the most difficult of situations that they never would have thought possible, and what they did to survive. I wondered then of so many women who experienced and suffered during the Civil War, the slaves, the nurses, civilians, those who perhaps starved to death, fell to disease, or simply died of a broken heart. What of them? And how many of you out here tonight have visited battlefields and cemeteries and stood at the rows upon rows and rows that said unknown? What of them? Who were they? Who remembers them? In order to try to understand these women, I found their words haunting and riveting as I researched actual Civil War diaries, especially from the women of the South. Much of the fighting that took place was in the South, and it was their words and sacrifice that brought me to their voices. As difficult as some of those stories were to read, their pain and suffering and loss was riveting with each page. I stayed true to their words, empathizing with them the great expense it took to write these diaries and honoring those who did. Honoring them here by telling some of their stories, some unknown, but here not forgotten. And although these diaries and events contain riveting and poignant events, there's glimmers of hope, of survival that come through. We must remember that the roles of women pre-Civil War were quite limited: wife, mother, caregiver. The exodus of men of the households forced so many women to pick up the hoe, to cipher the cost and volume of harvested goods, to learn new ways to support their families, and they did. Women became nurses, which we never had before, teachers, painters, seamstresses, and managers of their own land and families. It was the beginning of women in the forefront who would rally to have their voices heard and fight for their own equality for future generations like ourselves here today. For the most part, the narrator in the poem is a woman, nurse, or even the voice of a soldier, speaking of a woman lost to history. And from a few selected poems, we shall hear the heartbreaking voice of Charlotte Wickham Lee, the daughter-in-law of Robert E. Lee, and her tragic and short life. I didn't know anything about her until I was able to research her, and what a heartbreaking story. And from the voice of a broken-hearted Northern mother whose son was killed at the Klingle House after the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st through 3rd, 1863. And to the very first poem that I wrote in the collection, Winchester, Virginia, 1862. This poem was inspired by the diary of Cornelia Peake MacDonald, a Civil War diarist from 1860 to 1865, whose descriptions of the death of her baby daughter Bess in Winchester, Virginia in 1862 was so heartbreaking, it inspired this poem. And then to the last poem, My Henry. This poem is the story of an unknown widow residing in Gettysburg, whose husband has died in the Battle of Gettysburg. In her grief, she finds herself going to see President Abraham Lincoln at the dedication of the New Soldiers National Cemetery on November 19th, 1863, and her reaction to his Gettysburg address. And now there are several poems in the collection that we do know who's speaking, and that was done due to the deep emotional and heartbreaking moment of the war and its aftermath. For example, one of the poems is called The Angel of Gettysburg, Elizabeth Thorne. In this poem, we hear directly from Elizabeth and she was Evergreen Cemetery's caretaker at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg, and her descriptions of the aftermath of the battle. She was 6 months pregnant at the time and managed to bury 106 Union soldiers on her own in the blazing and unforgiving heat. This singular act would herald her as the Angel of Gettysburg. This is an unusual approach to the Civil War. For the first time, both literature and history are entwined to bring forth voices never heard before, voices lost in the stillness of time. The rhyme and narrative of the poetry are the voices given to those who never made it into the history books, yet suffered equally as much as those who did. Of course, I could not give a name or a face to those who are speaking to you now, these unknowns, but listen to their soulful voices of those lost and forgotten as they echo through the past and come to life here this evening. These poems were not created to learn about generals and flanking maneuvers or artillery action. The poems are the humanity of the voices of our history as we peel back the layers of the history books to reveal the unknowns, the lost and the forgotten. Again, the lines of North and South are blurred in this collection. You're going to say, what? And the reason quite simply being that suffering has no boundaries. I will now read 4 selected poems of the nameless and faceless women of the Civil War. The first poem I will read is called Rooney's Wife. This is a poem about Charlotte Wickham Lee, and I came upon the story of Charlotte Wickham Lee while reading Mary P. Cooling's book, The Lee Girls. Charlotte was the daughter-in-law of Robert E. Lee. This was General Lee's second son, General William Fitzhugh Lee, obviously of the Confederate Army. And what happened to Charlotte was she was a frail woman. She had 2 pregnancies very quickly, 2 births. And unfortunately, both of these children died. And she didn't really rally. And then very soon after the death of the second child, it seems that her husband, they called him Rooney, was captured by the North. And I believe this was sometime in late 1862, early 1863, when her husband was captured. And I understand that Custis, William Fitzhugh's brother, volunteered to take Rooney's place in the prison so that Rooney could come and be by Charlotte's side, and that request was denied. And it's seeing, when I think she realized she wasn't going to see her husband, it's almost that she just gave up and died. And General Lee was to say of her that, quote, that Charlotte joined her little cherubs and our angel Annie. This was Lee's daughter Annie, who passed away on October 20th, 1862 in heaven, unquote. And it's actually that he believed that she did die of a broken heart. But Charlotte's memory lives on here tonight as a reminder to all that not all casualties of the Civil War were on the battlefield. Rooney's wife. I'm not so famous as my husband, you see. History has faded me from sight, but that will not stop, but that will not stop me to tell you my story of heartbreak, loss, and plight. I came to the family of R.E. Lee was the name, and fell in love with the second son. 'Tis William Henry Fitzhugh Lee, my life, my joy, my everything. God's will, you see, was done. My name I shall tell you is Charlotte Wickham Lee. Of my short life I will now tell, newlyweds in the Civil War, of such things that I did dispel. From the first of our marriage I worried my heart of marches and battles and so, and deaths by scores with no end. My life, my husband, please know. On a hot July day in 1862, I buried our child, you see. Our beautiful boy was taken from earth. Oh God, help me, please. And yet I continued on, expecting another babe. My heart became broken beyond compare. And soon she was to follow beside her brother, a little sweet girl, beautiful and fair. Of these losses that cut my heart and took the light from my eyes, there was yet another agony from which I could not arise. They told me you were captured by the North, and so was offered your brother in your stead, for you to come and be by my side, but it was refused and my heart again bled. There are such times in life, of this I tell you now, there is such thing as death from a broken heart. It took me of this, I avow. The next poem I will read is called The Klingle House. The Klingle House is actually on the battlefield at Gettysburg National Military Park. There it is. This is a photo that I took. This is the sunset facing the windows at the Klingle House. And the story is that the house was purchased by Daniel Klingle in April of 1863. He lived there with his wife Hannah and 2 young children. And on the morning of July 2nd, the family was warned by Union forces they must leave the house. And so, because of obviously the Battle of Gettysburg, July 1st through 3rd. And so they did vacate it. They went by way of the Trossel farm. And it would be, and by the base of Little Round Top. And of course, the foot of Little Round Top, that was on July 2nd, and then of course Pickett's charge on July 3rd, and which thousands of dead soldiers from both Union and Confederate would be the result of this terrible, terrible battle. But on July 4th, the Klingle family returned to their home to find a devastating scene. Bullet holes riddled the house, powder marks charred the walls, crops were destroyed, as well as most of the fences around the property. It said, the farm was covered by the dead, quote, bodies lay all around the house. 2 were just inside the gate and 2 others under the porch, where they must have crawled for shelter before dying of their wounds. One shattered tree in the Klingle's orchard concealed 4 dead soldiers huddled around a cooking pan with food still in it. And so in this poem, The Klingle House, we hear from an unknown woman, in this case, a Northern mother who received a letter from her son's commanding officer. He was killed during the battlefield. I stood right there on the Klingle House, on that porch right there. And it seemed that the voice of this unknown woman came to light to tell us of her son. We understand his great sacrifice and the pride she had in his death. And to me, when you stand there, there is a palpable sadness that surrounds this house, silent and quietly heartbreaking. It's brought to life this evening by this unknown mother and son bound together on the fields of Gettysburg. I will now read The Klingle House. My eyes could barely see for the tears that stung my sight. News that my son Ethan had ascended to the Almighty's light. The letter I held in my hand from your commander I see, to tell me of your bravery so that others could be free. In early July of 1863, upon the battlefield of our North, Gettysburg, 'tis the name, so how you did go forth. 3 days of such fighting, the slaughter I cannot grasp. So many gone like you, my son, I fear I shall collapse. But as I read the letter and heard of how you died, it is as if I can see you, my son, and be there at your side. So now I will take my breath and read the part of your pain, and how you left this earth a better man. Of this I shall refrain. 'Twas on July the 4th, the holiday of our nation's birth, they found your body, my son. With your comrade next to you, God's will you see was done. It says here you were wounded, and I tried to take shelter, I see, to the Klingle farm under the porch, yet it was not meant to be. The owner came and found his farm littered with the dead of 3 days of the din of battle where the nation bled. I see you, my son, under that porch as you tried to save your life, yet God had other plans for you and took you from that strife. There is no more to say just now. The letter, it ends with thanks for the sacrifice of so many, my Ethan in the ranks. I'm sorry, I get a little emotional when I read these poems. They're just touching my heart, no matter how many times I read them. And to our next poem. This is called Winchester, Virginia, 1862. This poem, again, I think I touched on it earlier, was based on the diary of Cornelia Peake MacDonald. We see the diarist here. Her diary is called A Diary with the Reminiscence of War and Refugee Life in the Shenandoah Valley, 1860 to 1865. As we know, the town of Winchester, Virginia would change occupation from Confederate to Union a staggering 72 times. Her husband Angus joined the Confederacy, leaving Cornelia and their 9 children to try to survive in this most difficult of times. And she brings the horror of living through those days of the Civil War. She writes where the Union came in and they put everybody, all 9 people, just in one room as they occupied the home. Her husband Angus became a colonel in the Confederacy and would die on December 1st, 1864. She would eventually flee to Lexington, Virginia, and become a refugee. But the inspiration for this poem, Winchester, Virginia, 1862, comes exactly from Cornelia's words, who wrote of her own suffering over the loss of her child, her baby daughter, Bess. Her profound and deep abiding grief at her baby's death was so intense and so heartbreaking, it reached beyond the years, as she wrote, quote, "One evening as the sun was going down, I held her in my arms, and she breathed out her little life. Her eyes were fixed on my face with the shadow of death over them. The children stood around sobbing. The little breast heaved and panted, one long sigh, and all was still, her eyes fixed on my face. Ah, that fearful shadow, how I saw it flit over that lovely countenance, withering all its bloom and leaving its own ashen gray to remain forever," unquote. Cornelia also wrote that she saw Confederate General Stonewall Jackson one Sunday in town, deep in prayer at her church. We know that General Jackson did have a presence in Winchester in 1862. Perhaps the general did stop to comfort an unknown grieving woman sometime over the course of the Civil War, a woman without a name or a face, but with now a voice to share a moment of grief over the loss of a child. A woman, perhaps, just like Cornelia. I will read the poem, Winchester, Virginia, 1862. I made my way past the front of my door to where the earth was disturbed just days before, and stood and gazed at the small square of earth that housed my baby 2 years after her birth. And as I knelt before the tiny grave, the tears falling that could not save her from the early death, baby girl, come back, take my breath. And as I stared at the flowers that bloom and surround you now in your earthly tomb, I heard a thunderous noise and raised my head to see the swarm of soldiers, our Johnny Reb. And wonder of wonders, it was ever so true, our daring leader Stonewall. And I knew that soon our Winchester, it was known, would battle the Yankees for our home. It was then I saw the general come near and saw my face flushed with tears, and stood with me beside my baby's grave, his eyes grieving he could not save, and reached for my hand with effortless grace, saying he knew of the pain of which I faced, for he too did lose a son, born stillborn. He said God's will was done. I met his eyes so deeply colored blue, and knew of his pain, it was so true, and watched in silence as he reached to embrace the little violets around my baby's place, and told me gently as he turned to leave, God is with her, do not grieve. The last poem I will read is called My Henry. This is the story of an unknown woman who heard that President Abraham Lincoln was coming to Gettysburg to dedicate the new soldier cemetery for the Union Civil War dead. Her husband was in the Battle of Gettysburg 5 months earlier, and her husband's name was Henry, and he died during the battle. She's still suffering greatly over his loss, but she resolves to come to the cemetery to hear President Lincoln speak. And what she hears in the 2-minute address is riveting. She says, like poetry from God, I bowed my head to pray. She tries to move through the crowd to see the president and to tell him about her Henry and how he died, but the crowd's too great for her. And then in an instant, he raises his head and their eyes meet. And in that moment, she sees Lincoln's own death in his eyes, and that the dear president knew of his own fate as well. It binds these two people together in this one fateful moment frozen in time. I'm going to read My Henry. I walked past the patch of earth that housed my Henry, now gone, Silence forever from my sight. God help me, I am so forlorn. Is Gettysburg, I tell you now, whose battle he so valiantly did fight. For our Union he did say, I still love him with all my might. 'Tis November now, 5 months has passed since then. So now our president is here to dedicate our fallen men. And so I heard his words quite beautiful, I do say. Like poetry from God above, I bowed my head to pray. It took him just 2 minutes or so, as the words flowed ever so divine. Like manna from heaven that touched my soul, I know that they did mine. Yet as much as I tried to be near him, the crowd in between too great, I wanted to tell our president of my Henry's fate. I had to try to reach him, to tell him of my heart. It was the look in his eyes that have haunted me, careworn, that gave me a start. For in those eyes, it seems, he too knew of his fate and would come to rest, I am sure, in the glory of heaven's gate. Before I close, I want to share this one last thought with you. Excuse me. When I completed the collection, I thought to ask my husband if Elvira would ever have her imagined herself on a cover of a book some 118 plus years after her death. And his reply to me was, she was waiting for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing those very moving poems with us. That was just, it's a totally different way to look at history, but I think it's a very enlightening way to do it. And I'll ask you if you want to go ahead and hit stop share, and then we will take some questions from the audience. I'm getting people saying very powerful, so moving. Thank you, Lisa. Great job. And while people are kind of processing and thinking about questions, I was wondering just what got you into poetry? Why did you start writing poems? And then what attracted you to the Civil War?
I've always loved poetry. I've always kind of written poetry over the course of my life. I was an English major, but my profession for many years was in professional real estate management. And so it was only after you know, kind of a life-altering situation that I'm like, I think I need to explore this side of my life. And the poem that comes to mind whenever anyone asks me this question was written by Edgar Allan Poe, Annabel Lee. I heard that poem when I was in the 6th grade. It stayed with me. And I know that poem was really a ballad. And if we have time at the end, this signature poem that I'm donating to the National Park Service, Rise Up All You Manassas Rise, it's actually more of a ballad type poem. So that's really what brought me to poetry. And as far as the Civil War is concerned, I've always loved history. I loved the presidents. I loved Abraham Lincoln, Mary Lincoln, and I think that in combining the two, it kind of happened by accident. The Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War had started out, the first book had started out as a completely different project, and my partner, at that time didn't want to continue with it. So I had come up with the name of Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War, and so the poetry that summer just came to me, and I was putting together Civil War battles along with the ballads and narratives of poetry to bring a little bit of a deeper level, as opposed to generals, and that's of course very important. I mean, that's what history is all about. But I wanted to bring it to a deeper level, and I wanted to bring it to those who don't have a voice. It was very important as I wrote about these individuals or all of these unknowns, and a lot of research through the diaries really helped a lot. So that's how I came upon it.
Well, thank you for that. And I think you definitely succeeded.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Niels has asked, as you were doing your research and everything, did you come across poems written by Confederate women? And if so, did these women talk about slavery at all? Did you see any pro-slavery sentiment in their writings, or did you explore those poems at all?
I actually did not come across any kinds of poems. Now, maybe that was just not what, I came across. It was mostly in the diaries. It was mostly day-to-day events and things like that. I'm sure there are poems out there. And if there are, believe me, I would absolutely love to read them. I'm sure there are. I just did not come across them. And were their poems often laced with pro-slavery? Again, I didn't come across any of the poems, but of course, some of the Southern women diaries did have overtones of pro-slavery, because we know that some of these educated women that were writing them were women of that society. So,
All right. And my cat is putting her paw forward into the screen, but so I'm curious to know just a little bit about the artist in residency programs that the National Park Service has, and if you're familiar with how long they've been around, and is it only poets that are selected, or do they select people who practice other forms of art? I'm just curious to find out about that. And then also, I would love for you to share the poem that you wrote for Manassas.
Well, I tell you, the National Park Service has several programs available throughout the country for artists in residence. And I'm not sure, some are newer than others. Some, provide you housing and a stipend. And it all varies depending on what type of program and where it is in the country. I loved the opportunity because they have many avenues and I encourage anyone here who's a writer, a sculptor, a painter, any type of that medium, to go online and Google National Park Service and scroll down. Sometimes it's a volunteer, that the tab you go under, and they have a list of the criteria of what you need to do to apply. Some obviously have to have a narrative, et cetera, of what you're going to do while you're there. What is your medium? But there are, and I know there was someone in Manassas who was an artist, a sculptor, in Gettysburg, a photographer. There's all of that artistic medium that gives the artist an opportunity to explore that part of themselves and share it with the park. And it really, really is an extraordinary opportunity. And I urge anybody who's interested, just try. I mean, I tried, I think, like for 4 years to get into Gettysburg, and then I did. And at the same time, after I won Gettysburg, then I said, well, let me also try Manassas. And I had tried several times to get into Manassas, and then I was able to. So don't give up if this is something you want to do. And I was told by someone in the National Parks Arts Foundation that they like to see you keep trying. In other words, just don't give up. Oh, I didn't make it. So I urge everyone, if that's something you would like to explore, it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. It will stay with you for the rest of your life. This photograph behind me, I'm going to lean over, so excuse me. This was taken on the Bull Run Trail at Manassas. This was in the fall of 2021. This particular photograph was the backdrop of my signature poem that I'm donating to the National Park Service in August of this coming August. I have been invited back to recite my poetry out on the battlefield for a couple of days during the 160th commemoration of the Second Battle of Manassas, which is at the end of August. And so I will be presenting this photograph with the poem called "Rise Up, All Ye Manassas Rise," there. So
And did you want to go ahead and recite that poem for
Yep,
us?
I will,
And then
I will go ahead.
I'll come back to you with a couple more questions that just came in.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. So this is the poem that I wrote. And actually, if you look down here, I was so inspired by that beauty and walking very close. If those of you who have been down to Manassas and the Bull Run Trail, and you're walking through the forest and the water is on your left side, I was standing right there when this poem came to mind, and I'm donating this to Manassas. It's called Rise Up, All You Manassas, Rise. Rise up, all you Manassas, rise, and take your place among the skies. For in these fields, among those unknowns, there are stories I know that are yet untold, whispers of valor and elan that you did make, stories of friendships you did not forsake. Rise up, all you Manassas, rise, and take your place along God's side. These lush fields, colored in magnificent green, were once killing fields of the obscene, a battlefield where the country divided and fought, and now where unity shall forever be taught. Rise up, all ye Manassas, rise. I have heard your silent cries, whispers of those left behind without a name or face. So many I know here in this place, names like the deep cut, unfinished railroad to witness here and there, and the stone house, Henry Hill, filled with such despair. With each step across these hallowed grounds, be mindful a soldier may have found a final resting place too young to die, yet so many did is how I cry. Rise up, all ye Manassas, rise. Your presence here is so defined. Just walk the stone bridge along the river bed, the one called Bull Run that long ago bled. Stop and listen to the forest sounds, and for a moment become one with them, for all their sacrifice and so many men. Rise up, all ye Manassas, rise. Take thy brethren by your side, and hand in hand for those who ascended to the Almighty's throne, let us never forget those lost and unknown.
Thank you for that. And
Thank you.
that definitely brings it down to the human level and away from just sheer numbers of casualties.
That's right.
So there were a few questions that came in, and someone was asking about Elvira's wedding veil. And he says, it brings to mind that I only know of the veil tradition as Jewish or Catholic. And do you know about Elvira's religious persuasion?
I don't. Again, there's quite a few letters in there. Some are illegible. It could be buried in there, but I actually don't know. That's a good question. You know, I might ask one of my relatives, find out if they actually knew, because they might know. Thank you for that. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very good question. And
Good
I don't
question.
know a lot about I'm not super knowledgeable about Civil War fashion, but I thought I remembered that the wedding veils were not all that common at the time. So yeah, that would be something interesting.
That's very good. That's very good. And you know, one thing that I did find out about Elvira, you know, obviously her son, if he was able to purchase Bailey's Crossroads for a summer residence, he was very well heeled. We call them well-heeled, very, you know, high-level society. His wife, Jessie, the 3 daughters. Also in the box, we have White House invitations to the inaugural balls over several inaugurations from the time period of I believe 1900 to the early 1920s. So this was a very established family. Her daughter Lillian married a Charles Abbott. Charles Abbott was a high-level principal at the Smithsonian Institute. Also, Mr. Abbott was one of the founders of solar power, the early founders of solar power. So my point is, this is a very, very educated, very well-heeled society family, as I found out. Yeah. So that might be why she had that veil, see?
Maybe so.
Yeah.
And then there was a question about where can they buy the book? Richard wants to know. And usually I get to say, you can go to our website. We have the book, but I talked to one of the people in our shop, and she said it had not yet arrived, and she's having a very hard time getting it. It's on order, but we don't have it yet. So you can hold out a little bit and hope to check our website and get the book with us, or I bet Lisa can direct you somewhere as well.
Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, it's all there. I know, I didn't want to do that. I'd rather kind of get it through you. I hope that situation, you know, clears up. So if you need
I
any
hope
help,
so too. Yeah, because I checked
reach out to me.
earlier in the week and said, we've got the book. And she said, I've been trying to get it, but I haven't gotten it yet. So fingers crossed, we'll get that soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, somebody said they got it from Kindle. So yeah, that's always an option too.
That's always an option.
If you don't want to hold that paper in your hands. So.
I hope you enjoyed it, Cassandra. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, for being here with us tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. And
thank you, everyone. Yeah.
It was great having you with us. And
thank you. And I'm very excited that.
Oh, go ahead.
And I'm very excited that I know this is far away, but I'll be there in person, April 1st, 2023.
Yes.
I know.
So
I know. We hate to do that.
We're already starting to make those plans. So
yep, and I'm already booking into early 2023. So that's why we're doing it virtually, because I'm in between two travel lectures. So this was very exciting to be here. Obviously, as you know, I am a member of the museum. My husband and I, you know, love it. We love supporting it, the programs. It was really a pleasure and a wonderful experience to be here this evening. Thank you so much. And thanks, Stephanie, as well. And thank you to all of these wonderful people who came this evening and wanted to hear another way about learning about the Civil War. I thank you all sincerely. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And for those of you that are able to come to our programs in person, come out and see us on Sunday. For our virtual audience, I look forward to seeing you in about a month. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.